Governments are finally paying attention to the problem of space debris and the need for satellite servicing and space debris removal. And it's not just US governments, because it is a global problem. There were two pieces of news that came out today and then something on Friday that really highlight the fact that there is interest in dealing with this problem, in being responsible stewards of our orbital environment, and not just US government money flowing into this, but other governments as well. Turion Space, which is a startup based in California, was awarded a $1.9 million contract by SpaceWorks. That's Space WERX. And that's a US Department of Defense branch. SpaceWorks has actually contributed a lot of money, given a lot of awards to various companies to deal with satellite servicing and space debris removal. So that award in itself isn't too surprising. For those of you not aware of what Turion Space does, they're a company focused on space situational awareness, space domain awareness, however you want to phrase that. So understanding what's going on, looking not just, not necessarily at Earth, but on the orbital environment around Earth and beyond. They are also focused on debris capture technology. So especially if there is a satellite or a piece of space debris that is not meant to be attached to, that's what they're focused on. And then deorbiting that. Deorbiting whatever that is. It's a satellite that's beyond its lifetime, or it is a piece of space debris, spent booster, something like that, that can be captured, especially larger objects that they're focusing on, captured and then deorbited. With longer term sites on asteroid mining. Actually, I have a client who's doing something very, very similar. And because I just did work with a client doing something very similar, I know that globally, there's only so much interest in this kind of technology, the capture of space debris or asteroids or, satellites. This is actually dual use technology. It could be a satellite that you want to capture that is dead, inert, beyond its lifetime, or it could be technically an enemy satellite, an adversary satellite that you want to attach to. They use the phrasing uncooperative space objects. So that could be an object, again, that it was never meant to be captured, like a dead satellite from old or a space debris, or it could be an adversary satellite. But that dual use technology is present in these kinds of technologies where we are actually trying to do good. We're trying to capture something so that it doesn't stay in Earth orbit forever, causing problems like exploding like the Russian rocket last week, or colliding into something. We just want to clean up our orbital environment with long-term sites on asteroid mining, perhaps. And because I recently did work with a client on this very subject, I know that globally there's not a whole lot of money flowing into this. It's really very US centric, but then it's also pockets of governments interested in this in Europe, especially in the UK, and in Asia, especially in Japan. But it seems like other governments are starting to pay attention a bit more for the need for this kind of thing. And this is extremely important for anybody who's interested in space activity in any way, because every one of us who is involved in space, who wants space progress to continue, needs to be able to launch. And in order to launch, you need to be able to get through or into the orbital environment around Earth. So whether you are putting something in low Earth orbit, or you're wanting to go beyond to Moon, Mars, beyond the solar system, you need to be able to safely navigate through the orbital environment, which means keeping it clean of space debris or of anything that can cause significant space debris. My first full-time job was working for a nonprofit that was essentially entirely funded by NASA. I think they're still entirely funded by NASA pretty much. And the idea came to us that we should fund some kind of technology development that did something similar. I don't remember the details anymore, but it was essentially capturing space debris. And the chief economist of the company at the time made the comment, why should we be funding this? Why is it our responsibility, or why is it the government's responsibility to be paying for this? What's the return on investment for the government? And at the time, I just could not believe he said that, because to me, it's a public good to keep our environment clean, whether it is environment here on Earth surrounding us, or the environment in space where we want to operate. And very, very much the Department of Defense sees the benefit of having the advantage of satellite activity and satellite hardware and satellite assets, and therefore wants to keep that environment clean and promote technologies that can either extend the lifetime of satellites, add additional technologies to satellites, so that's satellite servicing, or deorbit it, making sure that we clean up what we put up there. Also announced today, the European Space Agency ESA awarded 3 contracts to 3 fairly large companies: Airbus, Defence and Space, OHB, and Thales Alenia Space. So pretty major companies in Europe. ESA awarded them contracts to develop low Earth orbit constellations. Didn't say how many in the constellation, but just generally constellations that abide by their zero debris policy. This is a new policy that ESA implemented. It's very similar to policies in the United States, where generally speaking, the best amount of space debris is 0. And so we want to create policies and procedures so that we do not leave anything up there longer than it needs to be. And then we can probably deorbit or move things into a graveyard orbit. ESA has this goal of doing 0 debris by 2030. That's extraordinarily optimistic. I don't think they've got the money to put into that kind of thing. It depends on how they define it, I suppose. But I'm glad that they are working toward it. And I'm glad that they are starting with some of these major companies that can trickle down into some of the smaller companies throughout Europe, so that these kinds of mentalities and procedures can be implemented from the top down. And then a piece of news that I just saw today that was actually announced on Friday was that CNES, which is the French space agency, awarded a contract to Infinite Orbits along with Telespazo France to do satellite servicing missions, 2 satellite servicing missions in fact. And the idea is that they are going to come together to latch onto a satellite, to attach to a satellite, to extend its lifetime. This is a satellite that's at the end of its life. They're going to extend the lifetime, and then they're going to put it in either a graveyard orbit or deorbit it. So very similar to some things that Northrop Grumman has done in the past with its satellite servicing, its MEV program. So even beyond ESA, some of these other space agencies in Europe that are under the ESA umbrella, of course, but not as well funded, not as large as ESA is, some of these other countries are seeing the benefits of awarding these kinds of contracts to their own space companies. And I'm very much hoping that this idea spreads, that the more that we globally do to correct the problem of space debris, which was ignored for decades, the better we will all be. And this includes things like satellite servicing to extend the lifetime of satellites already up there, if it makes sense to do so. It includes things like deorbiting properly within a certain period of time. Here in the United States, the FCC put in a regulation to deorbit space debris within 5 years after the end of life of a satellite. Now, I'm very curious to know, after a Supreme Court ruling, whether or not the FCC can regulate space debris or not. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to go into that. But I very much hope we in the United States can continue to regulate space debris in a positive direction. And when you look at some of these companies that are operating large amounts of satellites in space, think SpaceX or Amazon, they have a responsibility to themselves to do just that, to be responsible stewards of the orbital environment, so that they don't have, Starlink satellites, for example, causing problems, or Project Kuiper satellites causing problems that are going to interfere with the rest of its own constellation. It benefits countries and companies. It benefits everybody. Every party involved benefits. There's no clear calculation on the return on investment as far as I know, but just, you can imagine if we are all trying to operate in a space that is limited, then we need to make sure that we can continue to operate sustainably. And this, of course, also means not creating debris on purpose. And so I do believe that Russian satellite that broke up last week was an accident, but there have been other cases recently where countries have blown up satellites on purpose to prove that they can do so. And so making sure that we ban anti-satellite tests, especially Connect tests, where we're going to cause even more space debris and space debris clouds. I'm very heartened to see that this is being taken seriously globally, and I do hope other countries, even countries that are very small with very small space budgets, are able to be responsible with their own launches and their own space hardware, and then also consider how they can come together globally to help the global initiative, whether or not to just add their name to an anti-satellite ban initiative or to a zero debris initiative or whatever it happens to be, or incentivizing their national companies to make sure that space debris is handled appropriately, space hardware is handled appropriately. This is going to continue to be a huge topic, and hopefully it'll be positive news like this that says that we're taking action to correct a problem, rather than negative attention on space debris clouds or something that came too close to too close for comfort, which sometimes companies like Leolab observe and say this came really super close to hitting and it could have been a disaster, but it didn't. We want to avoid that kind of news by avoiding that kind of situation. I applaud SpaceWorks, I applaud ESA, and I applaud CNES for issuing these contracts, and I hope other countries also follow suit.